My name is Maya. I am 32 years old. My mother-in-law pointed her red manicured finger right in my face in front of the entire family and said, "You are nothing but a freeloader, a parasite feeding off my son." Meanwhile, my husband stood there filming me on his phone and mocking me for his friends. So I decided to destroy his entire family world. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic in-laws who underestimated your worth. The air in the formal dining room of our $2 million Atlanta brownstone smelled of roasted lamb and expensive expectation. It was our traditional Sunday dinner. The massive mahogany table was set with fine china and crystal glasses that caught the light from the extravagant chandelier overhead. From the outside, it looked like the pinnacle of black excellence. We were the picture-perfect affluent family that people aspired to be. But sitting at that table, I felt nothing but a suffocating toxicity that had been brewing for 5 long years. At the head of the table sat Vivian, my 62-year-old mother-in-law. Vivian was a prominent figure at her mega-church in Atlanta, always dressed in impeccable designer suits, always judging those she deemed beneath her. She ruled her family with an iron fist and a sharp tongue wrapped in Southern church lady pleasantries. Next to her sat my husband, Darren. He was 35 years old and presented himself as a high-level investment director. He wore custom-tailored suits, drove luxury cars, and constantly preached about building generational wealth on his social media platforms. Across from me sat my sister-in-law, Kiara, who was 29 and dripping in designer labels she could not actually afford, and her husband Trey, a 32-year-old crypto investor who loved to boast about his latest sports car rentals. The dinner had been tense from the moment the blessing was said. Vivian had been dropping passive-aggressive comments about my career all evening. As a forensic accountant, I investigate corporate financial fraud. It is demanding work that requires sharp attention to detail and a relentless pursuit of the truth. But to Vivian, I was just a glorified calculator who did not know how to properly support a powerful black man. I was quietly cutting a piece of lamb when Vivian suddenly slammed her heavy silver fork down against her plate. The sharp clinking sound silenced the entire room. She turned her body fully toward me, her eyes narrowing with absolute contempt. "You know, Maya," she began, her voice vibrating with malice, "I watch my son break his back every single day to provide you with this beautiful home and this luxurious lifestyle. And what do? You sit there in your cheap little suits, working your little desk job, contributing absolutely nothing to the legacy of this family." I slowly set my knife down. The room went dead silent. Even Trey stopped chewing his food. Vivian leaned forward and pointed her bright red manicured finger directly in my face. The tip of her nail was trembling with rage. "You are a parasite," she spat out. The word hung in the air, heavy and toxic. "You are nothing but a freeloader feeding off my son. You bring no value to this table. You are a leech draining the greatness right out of him." I did not gasp. I did not cry. My training as a forensic auditor taught me to remain completely detached when faced with hostility. I simply looked at her finger and then looked at my husband, expecting him to intervene, expecting him to be the man who stood up for his wife. Instead, Darren leaned back in his tufted leather chair and pulled out his phone. He did not look angry or embarrassed by his mother. He looked amused. He opened his camera app and pointed the lens right at me. "Oh, let her speak, Mom." Darren laughed, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let the group chat see how the parasite reacts when she gets called out. Smile for the camera, Maya. Let everyone see the face of a woman who hit the jackpot and still does not know how to act grateful." He was actually recording my humiliation to share with his friends. The betrayal was so profound it almost took my breath away, but I forced my lungs to expand and contract steadily. I kept my face entirely blank. I knew that showing any emotion would only give them the satisfaction they were desperately craving. That was when Kiara decided it was her turn to join the ambush. She tossed her long, expensive hair over her shoulder and sneered at me across the centerpiece of white roses. "Mom is absolutely right," Kiara said, her voice dripping with venom. "You need to remember your place, Maya. If it were not for Darren and his success, you would still be stuck in some run-down apartment in the projects. You would still be riding the bus with your blue-collar daddy. She laughed, a cruel and sharp sound that echoed off the high ceilings. Let us be real, she continued. Your father worked maintenance. He fixed toilets for a living. You come from a family of laborers who live paycheck to paycheck. You had absolutely no business stepping into our world. Darren elevated you. He brought you into a $2 million brownstone. He put you in circles with doctors and lawyers and investors, and instead of dropping to your knees to thank him every day, you just sit there acting like you actually belong here. I listened to every single word she said. I processed the deep-seated classism and the sheer arrogance of her insults. They truly believed they were royalty. They truly believed my father, an honest and hardworking man who broke his back to put me through college, was somehow inferior to their fake polished facade. They worshipped money and status above all else, and they believed Darren was the king who provided it all. Trey chuckled and raised his glass of expensive bourbon. Cheers to that, he muttered, taking a sip. You really did rescue her, bro. You have to teach me your charity methods. The entire table erupted into laughter. Vivian was smiling triumphantly, her chest puffed out with pride. Darren was still holding his phone up, capturing every second of my silent humiliation. Kiara was smirking at me, waiting for me to break down crying or start screaming. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to confirm their narrative of the angry, ungrateful woman from the wrong side of the tracks. But they did not know who they were dealing with. I am a forensic accountant. I do not deal in emotions. I deal in ledgers. I deal in hard, undeniable facts. And the fact was, I knew a secret that would absolutely obliterate their entire existence. I knew a truth so explosive that it made their current arrogance look like the ultimate comedy. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I picked up my crystal wine glass and took a slow, deliberate sip of the Cabernet. I let the rich liquid coat my throat, buying myself a moment of absolute perfect calm. I carefully set the glass back down on the table, aligning it perfectly with the edge of my placemat. Then I picked up my crisp white linen napkin and gently dabbed the corners of my mouth. I stood up from the table, moving with a slow and calculated grace. My chair scraped softly against the polished hardwood floor. I looked down at Vivian, whose triumphant smile was beginning to falter just a fraction under my icy stare. I looked at Kiara, who shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I looked at Trey, who suddenly found his bourbon very interesting. And finally, I looked straight into the camera lens of my husband's phone. Thank you for dinner, Vivian, I said, my voice smooth and utterly devoid of emotion. The lamb was slightly overcooked, but the company was exactly as I expected. Darren lowered his phone, his brow furrowing in confusion. Where do you think you are going? He demanded. We are not done talking to you. I am going to get some rest, Darren, I replied without looking back at him. It takes a lot of energy to carry the weight of this family. I turned my back on them and walked slowly out of the dining room. I heard the sharp intake of breath from Vivian. I heard Darren scoff and mutter something about me being crazy. I heard Kiara whisper that I was a coward who could not handle the truth. I let their voices fade into background noise as I climbed the grand sweeping staircase of the brownstone. I let them believe they had won. I let them sit down there in the dining room drinking their expensive wine and congratulating themselves on putting the blue-collar girl back in her place. I let them bask in the illusion of their wealth and superiority. Because as I walked down the long hallway toward the guest room, the edges of my mouth finally curled into a genuine smile. I was not retreating. I was preparing. They had just handed me the key to their own destruction. They had crossed the final boundary and severed the last remaining tie of loyalty I held for this marriage. They thought they were untouchable in their $2 million fortress. They thought Darren was the provider who held all the power. But as I entered the guest room and closed the heavy wooden door behind me, locking it with a satisfying click, my mind was already executing the audit of their lives. I walked over to my work bag and pulled out my laptop. The screen glowed to life, illuminating my face in the darkened room. Tomorrow, the real audit would begin. and I was going to strip away every single lie they had built their lives upon, starting with the very roof over their heads. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, listening to the heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway. It was Darren. He stopped right outside the master bedroom across the hall. I heard the sharp metallic slide of the deadbolt locking into place. He was locking me out. It was a classic Darren move. A petty theatrical display of power meant to remind me that he controlled the space. He wanted me to feel displaced and punished for disrespecting his mother. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a notification from him. I picked it up and read the message. Since you want to act like a guest in my house, you can start paying for the privilege. My mother is right. I have carried you for 5 years. Starting on the first of the month, I expect $3,000 in rent. If you do not like it, you can pack your bags and go back to the projects. I read the text twice. A soft, genuine laugh escaped my lips. Rent. He wanted me to pay rent to live in his house. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of this man was almost impressive. He was so completely intoxicated by his own performance of black excellence that he had actually begun to believe his own lies. He had spent so long playing the wealthy provider for his mother and sister that he forgot the actual paperwork he had signed. As a forensic accountant, I do not deal in feelings or shouting matches. When people yell, they are usually trying to distract you from what they are hiding. My entire career is built on following the money. I track hidden offshore accounts. I unravel complex corporate embezzlement schemes. I dismantle the financial illusions of powerful men who think they are smarter than everyone else. Darren was just a smaller, less sophisticated version of the corporate criminals I put behind bars for a living. I opened my laptop and typed in the heavily encrypted password for my personal files. The screen illuminated the dark room. I bypassed my regular daily folders and navigated to a secure cloud drive. I clicked on a file labeled M Investments LLC. Let me tell you a story about my blue-collar daddy. Kiara was right about one thing. My father worked as a maintenance man. He wore a gray uniform with his name embroidered on the chest. He fixed leaking pipes and repaired broken air conditioners in a modest apartment complex on the south side of the city. But what Kiara and Vivian and Darren did not know was that my father owned that entire apartment complex. He bought it bankrupt in the 90s, fixed it up with his own 2 hands, and turned it into a highly profitable real estate asset. He drove a 10-year-old pickup truck, but he had an investment portfolio that would make Darren and his fake crypto bro brother-in-law weep. My father taught me the most valuable lesson a black woman in America could ever learn. Wealth should be silent, poverty is loud. Darren and his family were deafening. When my father passed away, he left me a substantial trust fund. I did not buy designer bags or lease a luxury car to show off at a megachurch. I took that generational wealth and I invested it quietly. 6 years ago, before Darren and I were even engaged, I found this gorgeous, historic brownstone in Atlanta. It was a foreclosure. I bought it in cash outright under the name M Investments LLC. When Darren and I started planning our future together, his fragile ego could not handle the idea of moving into a house his wife owned. He was obsessed with portraying the image of the ultimate provider, the self-made king who rescued his queen. He begged me to let him buy a house for us. But Darren had terrible credit and massive student loan debt. No bank was going to approve him for a $2 million mortgage. So I offered him a compromise. I told him I found a private landlord, an investment company willing to lease us this beautiful brownstone with an option to buy later. I told him we could split the monthly costs, but he could be the primary leaseholder on paper to help build his credit. Darren jumped at the chance. For 5 years, Darren has been strutting around Atlanta, hosting lavish Sunday dinners and telling his mother, his sister, and his church congregation that he bought this $2 million mansion. He basked in their praise. He let Vivian boast to her prayer circle about her son, the real estate mogul. But the absolute best part of this entire arrangement was the paperwork. Darren never bothered to read the fine print of the lease agreement he signed. He was too eager to post photos of the house keys on Instagram. If he had read the document, he would have noticed the registered agent for M Investments, LLC. He would have realized that every single month when he transferred his portion of the household expenses into the landlord portal, he was directly depositing that money into my private corporate bank account. Darren was not the king of the castle. Legally speaking, Darren was just a month-to-month tenant, and I was his landlord. I sat cross-legged on the guest bed, scrolling through the property deed and the signed lease agreement. I took a screenshot of the text message Darren had just sent me, demanding rent for his house, and saved it to a newly created folder on my desktop. I named the folder Operation Eviction. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I opened a new browser window and logged into the state corporate registry to ensure M Investments LLC was perfectly compliant and up to date. It was. Next, I opened a draft document from my lawyer. Jocelyn, my sorority sister and corporate attorney, had drawn up these preliminary divorce papers a month ago when I first suspected Darren was hiding financial troubles. Now it was time to update them with lethal precision. I was not just going to divorce him, I was going to financially annihilate the false reality he used to oppress me. I drafted a formal 30-day notice to vacate the premises. As the sole owner of the LLC, I had the absolute legal right to terminate his month-to-month tenancy without cause. But giving him 30 days felt entirely too generous for a man who had just allowed his family to call me a parasite. I highlighted the 30 days and changed it to an immediate notice to quit based on breach of contract. I would find the breach tomorrow when I audited his personal accounts. The glow of the screen reflected in my eyes. The anger that had been simmering in my chest all evening cooled into a sharp, icy focus. Vivian wanted to talk about parasites. She was about to find out what happens when the host organism decides to thoroughly sanitize its environment. I checked the time. It was past midnight. The house was dead quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of the central air conditioning, a system I had paid to upgrade last summer while Darren was busy buying custom-tailored suits to impress his friends. I closed the LLC portal and stretched my neck, preparing to shut down the laptop and get a few hours of sleep before starting the deep dive into Darren banking records. I needed to know exactly how broke my arrogant husband truly was. Just as my hand moved toward the power button, a sudden movement caught my eye. A shadow blocked the thin strip of light seeping in from the hallway under the guest room door. Someone was standing right outside. I froze, watching the bottom of the door. The floorboards creaked softly under a heavy weight. It was Darren. I waited for the sound of a knock or the rattle of the doorknob. Instead, a crisp white piece of paper slid slowly under the gap between the door and the hardwood floor. It stopped right at the edge of the rug. The shadow retreated, and I heard Darren's footsteps padding away back to the master bedroom. I stared at the paper for a long moment. My pulse quickened slightly, not with fear, but with anticipation. I slipped off the bed and walked silently across the room. I bent down and picked up the document. It was printed on thick premium stock paper. The heading was printed in bold black letters. It read, "Personal Loan Authorization and Guarantee." Vivian demanded perfection and wealth from her children, so her children simply faked it. And when the money ran out, they decided to target the quiet, blue-collar girl who actually knew how to generate real wealth. They thought I was naive enough to just sign a piece of paper and hand over $150,000 to keep their house of cards from collapsing. I began downloading everything. I exported the G-Wagon lease agreement. I saved the zero balance statement from my emergency fund. I compiled a massive spreadsheet detailing every single transfer Darren made to Kiara and Trey. I backed up the evidence of Darren margin debt and his fraudulent business ledgers. I encrypted the entire package and sent it to 3 separate secure cloud servers. I also sent a duplicate file to Jocelyn, my sorority sister and corporate attorney, with a single instruction attached: prepare the war room. The sun was just beginning to rise over the Atlanta skyline. The dark sky gave way to a bruised purple dawn. I safely ejected my flash drive and completely wiped the browsing history on Darren's computer. I left the room exactly as I found it. I walked back into the guest room and changed into a crisp, tailored suit. I applied my makeup with meticulous precision, ensuring there was no trace of exhaustion on my face. I looked like a woman who was entirely in control of her destiny. Just as I was stepping into my heels, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. The caller ID flashed Vivian's name. It was barely 7 in the morning. I let it ring twice before answering, keeping my voice perfectly smooth and compliant. "Good morning, Vivian," I said. Vivian's voice cracked through the speaker, tight and urgent. She was not using her usual condescending drawl. She sounded demanding and panicked. "I need you down at the church right now. Do not tell Darren. Do not tell anyone. Just get dressed and get down here immediately." I paused, feigning confusion. "The church, Vivian. It is very early. Is everything all right?" "Do not ask questions, Maya," she snapped, her Southern Belle facade slipping to reveal the ruthless matriarch underneath. "This is a family emergency. We are holding an urgent women ministry meeting in the private fellowship hall. Pastor approved it. You need to be here. Your spiritual standing and your marriage depend on this conversation. If you do not show up, I will make sure the entire congregation knows exactly what kind of rebellious, ungrateful wife you are." She hung up the phone before I could respond. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear. An urgent women ministry meeting. Vivian was escalating the situation faster than I anticipated. She realized I was stalling on signing the loan agreement, so she was bringing in the heavy artillery. She was going to use the church. She was going to surround me with the most elite judgmental prayer warriors in Atlanta to shame me into submission. She wanted to break my spirit using the weight of the congregation. I picked up my keys and my leather briefcase containing my encrypted laptop. A cold smile touched my lips. Vivian wanted a church meeting. She wanted to play spiritual warfare to protect her son's fake empire. What Vivian did not realize was that I was coming to the sanctuary armed with the gospel of truth, and my scriptures were printed on official bank letterhead. I walked out of the guest room ready to face the congregation. The drive to Zion Fellowship Cathedral took less than 20 minutes, but it felt like descending into a beautifully decorated war zone. This was not a humble place of worship. It was a sprawling campus of glass and steel, an architectural monument to the prosperity gospel. Vivian treated this mega-church like her personal kingdom. She was the head of the women ministry, a position she wielded like a royal decree. I parked my car in the expansive lot, grabbed my leather briefcase, and marched toward the private fellowship hall. I pushed open the heavy double doors, and the smell of expensive floral perfume and aggressive righteousness hit me instantly. The fellowship hall was not set up for a casual morning meeting. It was an ambush. In the center of the plush carpeted room, Vivian sat in a high-backed velvet chair. Surrounding her in a tight circle were 12 of the most elite judgmental women in the entire congregation. These were the wives of deacons, local politicians, and wealthy businessmen. They wore tailored Sunday suits, silk blouses, and expressions of deep, pious concern. They held their leather-bound Bibles in their laps like loaded weapons, ready to strike down anyone who disrupted their fragile social hierarchy. And right there, sitting slightly outside the main circle with a porcelain teacup in her hand, was Chloe Vance, the 26-year-old lead choir director, the woman whose name was on the insurance policy for the matte black Mercedes G-Wagon that my stolen savings had paid for. Chloe was wearing a modest pastel dress, but the smirk resting on her perfectly glossed lips was anything but holy. She looked at me with the arrogant confidence of a woman who thought she was untouchable. She truly believed she had won. She believed she was sitting pretty in her luxury SUV funded by the very wife she was currently helping to humiliate. I kept my face entirely impassive. I did not glare at Chloe. I did not give Vivian the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. I walked toward the single empty chair placed deliberately in the center of their circle, the interrogation seat. "Maya." Vivian sighed heavily, pressing a lace handkerchief to her chest. "Thank you for coming. We are gathered here this morning because the Lord placed a heavy burden on my heart. I called my sisters in Christ because we need to stage an intervention for your spirit. The women around the room murmured in agreement, nodding their heads solemnly. Sister Vivian has been weeping all morning, one of the older deacon wives said, pointing a manicured finger at me. She is terrified for your marriage, Maya. She is terrified for your soul. Vivian closed her eyes and let a single perfect tear roll down her cheek. It was a masterful performance. If I did not know that she was actively conspiring to force me into a $150,000 fraudulent loan, I might have almost believed her distress. I love Darren. Vivian cried, her voice trembling with theatrical grief. I love my son, and I want him to succeed. He is a powerful black man trying to build a legacy for his family. But a king cannot build a castle when the queen is tearing down the foundation. Maya, you are failing your duties. You are spiritually broken. You are allowing fear and selfishness to block your husband's blessings. The gaslighting was so intensely suffocating it almost distorted reality. Vivian was publicly weaponizing the concept of the supportive black wife against me. She was using the cultural expectation that women of color must sacrifice themselves, suffer in silence, and blindly fund their husband dreams to guilt me into signing my financial ruin. Another woman, an elder in the church, leaned forward. A Proverbs 31 wife covers her husband Maya. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. Darren is a visionary, but we hear you are refusing to support his new investment. We hear you are holding on to your credit and your money like a miser, while your husband struggles to manifest his destiny. You cannot be unequally yoked in vision, Maya. You have to submit to his financial leadership. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting calmly on my briefcase. They were actually trying to spiritually shame me into co-signing a Ponzi scheme. They were using scripture to justify extortion. And Chloe. Chloe had the absolute nerve to nod her head in agreement, sipping her tea while watching me get berated. The mistress, who was currently driving around in a car financed by my drained emergency fund, was sitting in a church circle silently judging my ability to be a good wife. The hypocrisy was so thick it could choke a horse. I made a mental note to personally ensure Chloe was named in the federal subpoenas. Vivian reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out the crisp white loan authorization document. The exact same contract Darren had slid under my door. She placed it on the small glass table in front of me, along with a gold pen. This is not just a piece of paper, Maya, Vivian preached, her voice rising to a dramatic crescendo. This is a test of your faith. This is a test of your commitment to the covenant of marriage. Darren needs this capital by tomorrow. If you sign this today, you are telling the Lord that you trust your husband. You are telling this family that you are finally ready to be a team player. If you refuse, you are choosing pride over your marriage. And we will have no choice but to pray for Darren to find the strength to leave a woman who refuses to uplift him. The threat was no longer veiled. She was explicitly telling me that if I did not sign over $150,000 to fund their fraudulent lifestyle, she would use her influence in the megachurch to orchestrate a socially acceptable divorce. She would paint me as the villain to the entire city of Atlanta. Sign the paper, Maya, the deacon wife urged, pushing the pen closer to my hand. For your own salvation. Be the woman God called you to be. The social pressure was immense. The silence in the room was deafening save for the soft ticking of the wall clock. 12 powerful women glaring at me, expecting me to crumble. Expecting the quiet accountant to fold under the weight of their collective judgment. Chloe's smirk widened. Vivian leaned forward, victorious anticipation gleaming in her eyes. I slowly reached out and picked up the gold pen. I let it twirl between my fingers. I looked down at the contract, analyzing the fraudulent LLC name printed at the top. Next Gen Crypto Holdings. I looked up at Vivian. Then I looked past her, making direct eye contact with Chloe Vance. Chloe's smirk faltered just a fraction as my icy gaze locked onto hers. Vivian. I began, my voice ringing out clear and perfectly steady in the cavernous fellowship hall. I appreciate the prayers. I really do. But God gave me a brain highly specialized in forensic mathematics. And the math on this loan does not add up to salvation. It adds up to wire fraud. Vivian gasped, her hand flying to her chest. How dare you? I am not signing this, I stated flatly, dropping the gold pen back onto the glass table. It landed with a sharp clatter. I will not mortgage my future to fund a fake cryptocurrency venture. And I certainly will not fund any more luxury vehicles for women outside of my marriage. I held Chloe's gaze as I said those last words. The teacup in Chloe's hand rattled violently against its saucer. Her eyes widened in sheer terror. She knew that I knew. The blood drained completely from her face. Vivian stood up her chair, screeching backward. "You insolent, arrogant little girl!" she screamed, dropping the holy facade entirely. "You are going to sign that paper right now, or I swear to God I will destroy your reputation in this city. You will be a pariah. I will make sure no respectable family in Atlanta ever associates with you again. You are nothing without my son. The other women stood up with her, closing the circle tighter around me. The intimidation tactics were shifting from spiritual manipulation to outright hostility. They were attempting a physical and social squeeze to bully me into submission. They thought they had me trapped in their territory. I did not flinch. I kept my hand resting on my leather briefcase, which contained the heavily encrypted drive holding every single bank statement, routing number, and fraudulent lease agreement Darren had ever signed. "I do not care about your society circles, Vivian," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And I do not care about your fake empire. You cannot bully an auditor. We see the numbers and the numbers say you are all broke." Vivian raised her hand as if she might actually strike me. Her face contorted with rage. Before she could take another step, before any of the church elders could utter another word of toxic doctrine, the heavy oak double doors of the fellowship hall slammed open with a thunderous crash. The sound echoed through the room, freezing every single woman in their tracks. We all turned toward the entrance. Standing in the doorway framed by the bright morning light flooding the lobby was Jocelyn. She wore a razor-sharp crimson power suit holding a sleek leather folio. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor with the lethal precision of a corporate litigator arriving at a battlefield. She did not look like she was there for a prayer meeting. She looked like she was there to serve a death sentence. Jocelyn swept her gaze across the room of frozen churchwomen, her eyes landing on Vivian with absolute disdain. Then she looked at me and offered a slow, predatory smile. "Maya," Jocelyn announced, her voice cutting through the thick tension like a blade. "I have the federal paperwork you requested, and trust me, these women are going to want to hear exactly what is in it." The silence in the fellowship hall was absolute. Every single woman in that room stared at Jocelyn as she walked with measured, deliberate steps toward the center of the circle. Jocelyn did not just walk into a room, she commanded it. As a senior partner at one of the most ruthless corporate litigation firms in Atlanta, she made a living out of destroying arrogant executives. But today she was here for something much more personal. She was here for her line sister. We pledged the Alpha chapter together at Howard University. We survived the yard. We built our careers from the ground up. In our world, you do not ever let a sister walk into an ambush alone. When I sent her the message to prepare the war room, she knew exactly what I meant. Vivian recovered from her initial shock and pulled her shoulders back, trying to summon her matriarchal authority. "Excuse me," Vivian said, her voice trembling with indignation. "This is a private spiritual intervention for members of the women ministry. You have no right to barge into this sanctuary." Jocelyn stopped right beside my chair. She looked down at Vivian with a gaze so cold it could freeze the Atlanta summer heat. "I am not here for a prayer meeting, Vivian. I am here in my capacity as Maya personal legal counsel. And from what I heard standing outside those doors, you are dangerously close to crossing the line from spiritual guidance into tortious interference and defamation per se." The deacon wives exchanged nervous glances. The heavy legal terminology hung over them like a dark cloud. They were used to operating in a world of church gossip and social pressure. They were entirely unequipped to handle a corporate litigator. Vivian scoffed, trying to maintain her bravado. "Defamation. I am trying to save my son's marriage from a selfish woman. I am simply telling the truth to my congregation. If you speak one more word about Maya to this congregation, you will be speaking to a judge," Jocelyn replied, her voice dropping to a lethal calm. "Let me educate you on Georgia state law, Vivian. If you publicly spread false statements regarding Maya financial stability, her professional reputation, or her mental health in an attempt to coerce her into signing a fraudulent loan agreement, I will personally file a civil suit against you. I will sue you for everything you own. And just to be thorough, I will subpoena the financial records of this entire megachurch to determine if church resources are being used to facilitate the extortion of my client." A collective gasp echoed through the fellowship hall. The threat of a church financial audit was the ultimate nuclear option. The elder wives immediately took a synchronized step back, physically distancing themselves from Vivian. Nobody wanted the IRS or the federal courts looking into the church collection plates. Vivian's face turned a sickly shade of gray. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her power, her absolute control over this room had been shattered in less than 2 minutes. Jocelyn turned her attention to the perimeter of the circle. Her sharp eyes locked directly onto Chloe Vance. The choir director shrank back into her chair, gripping her porcelain teacup as if her life depended on it. "And as for you, Chloe," Jocelyn said, flashing a brilliant predatory smile, "I strongly advise you to park that matte black Mercedes G-Wagon in a secure garage. When the federal asset forfeiture warrants are issued, they tend to tow the vehicles right out of the church parking lot. It can be incredibly embarrassing for a worship leader." Chloe let out a tiny choked whimper. The teacup rattled against the saucer so violently that hot tea spilled over the rim and stained her pastel dress. The other women in the room turned to stare at the choir director, their eyes wide with dawning comprehension. The pristine image of Vivian's perfect church circle was completely disintegrating. Jocelyn looked back down at me. Her expression softened just a fraction, offering the silent, unwavering support of a sister who would go to war for me. "Are we finished here, Maya?" she asked. "We are finished here," I replied. I picked up my leather briefcase and stood up from the interrogation seat. I looked at Vivian one last time. She was sitting in her high-backed velvet chair, but she no longer looked like a queen. She looked like a terrified old woman who realized the walls of her fake empire were caving in. "You wanted me to be a supportive black wife, Vivian," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "You wanted me to handle the paperwork. That is exactly what I am doing. I suggest you go home and pray. You are going to need all the grace you can get." I linked my arm through Jocelyn's arm. Together we turned our backs on the stunned, silent room of elite church women. We walked down the center aisle of the fellowship hall, our heels clicking in perfect unison against the hardwood floor. We pushed open the heavy double doors and stepped out into the blinding sunlight of the church parking lot. The sweltering Georgia heat enveloped us as we walked toward Jocelyn's sleek silver Porsche Panamera. I let out a long, shaky breath, feeling the massive surge of adrenaline finally begin to recede. My hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of what had just happened. "You were magnificent in there," I told Jocelyn as we reached her car. "You hit her right where it hurts." Jocelyn unlocked the doors and leaned against the hood of the Porsche. She took off her designer sunglasses and looked at me, her expression grim. "I did not come here just to rescue you from a prayer circle, Maya. I came here because the situation is escalating faster than we anticipated." She opened the back door of the Porsche and retrieved a thick, heavy legal dossier bound in black leather. She handed it to me. The weight of the folders felt substantial in my hands. "I did the deep background check on next-gen crypto holdings, just like you asked," Jocelyn explained, crossing her arms over her chest. "I pulled the corporate filings, I tracked the offshore routing numbers, and I matched them against Trey historical business licenses. Maya, it is not just a fake shell company used for gambling. It is an active Ponzi scheme." I stared at her, feeling the air leave my lungs. "A Ponzi scheme," I repeated the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. "Are you absolutely sure?" Jocelyn nodded, her eyes dark with anger. "I am positive. Trey is not just losing his own money. He and Darren are actively soliciting capital from private investors. They are using Darren's fake image as a wealthy, successful investment director to lure people in. They promise these investors guaranteed 30% monthly returns on decentralized crypto staking. But there is no crypto staking. They are taking the new investment capital and using it to pay off the early investors to create the illusion of profit. The rest of the cash is being drained to pay for Trey-rented supercars, Darren luxury leases, and their massive gambling debts. My mind raced processing the catastrophic implications of her words. As a forensic accountant, I knew exactly how destructive a Ponzi scheme was. It was a financial black hole that inevitably collapsed, leaving total devastation in its wake. But who are the investors? I asked, frantically flipping open the dossier to look at the printed ledgers. Who are they targeting? Darren does not have any real connections on Wall Street. He operates completely on social media clout. Jocelyn placed her hand gently over the open dossier, stopping my frantic searching. She looked at me with profound sadness. Maya, look at where we are standing. I slowly lifted my head and looked at the massive stained glass windows of Zion Fellowship Cathedral, the sprawling parking lot, the elderly congregants walking slowly toward the sanctuary for the mid-morning service. A sickening realization hit me like a physical blow. No, I whispered, shaking my head. Tell me they did not. They did, Jocelyn confirmed, her voice heavy with disgust. They targeted the church. Darren used Vivian influence in the women ministry to gain access to the congregation elite. But they did not just stop at the wealthy deacons. They went after the widows. They went after the retired school teachers and the elderly maintenance workers. They convinced these seniors to cash out their 401k accounts and hand over their life savings to fund the next-gen crypto project. They told these elderly Black men and women that they were building generational wealth for the community. I looked down at the documents in my hands. The names on the investment ledgers jumped out at me. Mother Wilkins, who had sung in the choir for 40 years. Deacon Hayes, who greeted everyone at the front doors every single Sunday. These were good, honest, hardworking people who had trusted Darren because he wore nice suits and sat in the front pew with his influential mother. Darren and Trey had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from the retirement accounts of the most vulnerable people in their own community. And Darren had the absolute nerve to look me in the eye and demand that I take out a $150,000 loan to keep this fraudulent nightmare afloat. He was using my stolen emergency fund to buy a G-Wagon for his mistress, while the elderly women inside that church were losing their pension money to fund his fake lifestyle. The anger that had been simmering inside me evaporated. It was instantly replaced by a cold, calculating, and absolute rage. This was no longer just about a toxic marriage. This was no longer just about a disrespectful mother-in-law or a cheating husband. This was about justice. They were financial predators bleeding their own community dry while hiding behind the cross. What is our move? Jocelyn asked, watching my face transform. Do we take this to the local authorities? I closed the dossier and gripped the leather handle of my briefcase. The local authorities will take months to build a case, I said, my voice dead and flat. By then, Darren and Trey will have destroyed the evidence and funneled the remaining cash offshore. They think they have me backed into a corner. They think I am going home to cry and sign that loan document to save my marriage. I looked up at Jocelyn, my mind rapidly mapping out the ultimate audit. We are going to let them think they won. I am going to give them exactly what they want. But we are taking this straight to the top. I need you to draft a very specific legal clause for me to sign, and then I need you to get me the direct contact information for the lead investigator at the Federal Bureau of Investigation White Collar Crime Division. We are bringing the federal government to Vivian front door. We are bringing the federal government to Vivian front door. I repeated Jocelyn promised to myself like a sacred battle cry the entire drive to my office the next morning. The adrenaline from the church confrontation had faded into a cold and absolute state of hyper-focus. I was no longer just a woman trying to escape a toxic marriage. I was an auditor closing in on a massive financial crime syndicate that happened to be my in-laws. The prestigious accounting firm where I worked occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming glass high-rise in Midtown Atlanta. This was my sanctuary. This was an environment built on discretion, logic, and undeniable facts. The lobby was lined with imported Italian marble, and the only sounds you usually heard were the soft clicking of designer heels and the hushed voices of corporate executives discussing mergers and acquisitions. It was a place of true professional excellence, standing in stark contrast to the loud, flashy, and fraudulent aesthetic Darren and his family constantly projected. I settled into my corner office and powered up my dual monitors. I had a full day ahead of me. I needed to finish compiling the evidence package for the FBI and the IRS. I was carefully categorizing the wire transfers, mapping out the exact flow of the stolen retirement funds from the megachurch congregants into Trey offshore gambling accounts and Darren luxury lease payments. Every single transaction was a nail in their collective coffin. I was deep in the middle of cross-referencing a suspicious deposit when the sleek digital phone on my desk buzzed. It was the front reception desk. I pressed the flashing button. Maya, the receptionist, whispered, her voice tight with panic. I am so sorry to interrupt you, but there is a woman down here in the main lobby. She says she is your sister-in-law, and she is causing a massive disturbance. Security is asking if they should call the police, or if you want to come handle it. She is screaming your name. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. Kiara. They were getting desperate. The 48-hour window I had asked for was closing, and the pressure on their Ponzi scheme must have been reaching a boiling point. Trey investors were probably starting to ask questions about their promised returns, and the liquidity was completely dried up. They needed that $150,000 personal loan right now to pay off the older investors and keep the illusion alive. Darren and Vivian had failed to break me at the church, so they sent their unhinged attack dog to ambush me at my place of business. They wanted to humiliate me in my professional sanctuary. Do not call the police just yet, I told the receptionist, keeping my voice perfectly level. I will be right out. I stood up, smoothed the front of my tailored navy suit, and walked out of my office. I moved down the long glass corridor toward the main reception area. Long before I even reached the lobby, I could hear Kiara's shrill, entitled voice echoing off the marble walls. You better go get her right now, Kiara shrieked, pointing a finger at the terrified receptionist. She is ignoring my brother calls. She thinks she can just hide in this little cubicle farm while our family empire is on the line. Go get her. I stepped through the double glass doors into the main lobby. Several senior partners and high-value corporate clients had stopped in their tracks, staring at the spectacle unfolding by the elevators. Kiara looked like a woman on the verge of a total nervous breakdown. She was wearing oversized designer sunglasses, inside the building a gaudy logo-covered belt, and clutching a massive plastic cup of iced coffee. Her hair was messy and her hands were visibly shaking. The facade of the carefree, wealthy socialite was completely gone. She looked frantic, cornered, and dangerous. Kiara, I said, my voice projecting a calm, authoritative tone that demanded attention. What exactly do you think you are doing here? Kiara spun around, her eyes widening behind her oversized sunglasses. She marched toward me, her heels stomping aggressively against the marble floor. There you are, you selfish gold digger, Kiara screamed, pointing her free hand at my chest. You think you can just play games with our money? Darren told you to sign that loan agreement yesterday. Trey needs that capital transfer by this afternoon, or his entire server farm project is going to be delayed. You are ruining my husband's business. You are destroying our family empire because you are a jealous, spiteful little parasite. The senior partners of my firm exchanged horrified glances. The silence in the lobby was deafening, amplifying every single toxic word spilling from her mouth. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match her hysteria. I simply looked at her with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a volatile chemical reaction. There is no server farm, Kiara, I replied, my tone completely conversational. And there is no family empire. I know exactly where the money is going. You should probably tell your husband to stop placing high-risk offshore sports bets with the church elders' retirement funds. It is a very bad look for a supposed cryptocurrency genius. The color drained entirely from Kiara's face. Her jaw dropped open. For a split second, genuine terror flashed in her eyes as she realized the magnitude of what I had just revealed. She knew I knew. She knew the entire house of cards was collapsing, and the $150,000 lifeline was never going to arrive. But instead of retreating, Kiara's panic mutated into pure, unadulterated rage. The realization that she was about to lose her fake luxury lifestyle, that the designer bags and the rented supercars were going to be repossessed, pushed her completely over the edge. "Shut your mouth!" Kiara roared, her face contorting into a mask of pure hatred. "You do not know anything. You are just a broke, pathetic loser who got lucky my brother took pity on you." Before I could even register the shift in her body language, Kiara lunged forward. She swung her arm in a violent arc and hurled the entire contents of her large iced coffee directly at me. The freezing liquid hit me square in the chest. Dark brown coffee and crushed ice splattered across my crisp white silk blouse and my tailored navy blazer, ruining the expensive fabric instantly. The sticky sweet liquid dripped down my lapels and splashed onto the pristine marble floor at my feet. A collective gasp rang out through the lobby. One of the senior partners shouted for security. But Kiara was not finished. Fueled by a desperate, unhinged fury, she stepped directly into my personal space, raised her hand and slapped me hard across the face. The sharp, resounding crack of her palm striking my cheek echoed sharply in the high-ceilinged room. My head snapped to the side from the sheer force of the blow. A hot, stinging pain flared across my skin, spreading from my cheekbone down to my jaw. In the chaotic seconds that followed, the entire lobby erupted. Two heavily built security guards sprinted from the elevator banks, rushing to intercept Kiara. The receptionist was frantically dialing her phone. People were shouting. I slowly turned my head back to face Kiara. My cheek was burning. My silk shirt was ruined. I was standing in a puddle of melting ice and spilled coffee in front of the most powerful financial executives in Atlanta. Everything about the situation was designed to break my dignity and reduce me to a weeping, humiliated victim. But I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not raise a single finger to strike her back. I simply reached up and calmly wiped a drop of cold coffee from my chin. I looked at Kiara as the two security guards grabbed her arms and physically restrained her, pulling her away from me. She was thrashing wildly, kicking her designer heels against the marble floor and screaming obscenities at the top of her lungs. "Let me go!" she shrieked, her sunglasses flying off her face and clattering to the floor. "You are going to pay for this, Maya. Darren is going to destroy you. You are nothing." I looked over at the head of building security, who was rushing toward me with a look of absolute horror on his face. "Am so sorry," the security chief panted out. "Should we call the Atlanta Police Department? Do you want to press charges for the assault?" I took a slow, deep breath, letting the icy logic of the endgame settle over my mind. Calling the local police right now would result in a simple misdemeanor battery charge. Kiara would post bail within an hour, and Darren would use the incident to play the victim, claiming I was trying to tear his family apart. No, I needed something much more devastating than a local police report. I needed leverage. "Do not call the police," I instructed the security chief, my voice unwavering and crystal clear. "Just escort her off the premises and permanently ban her from the building." "But am she assaulted you?" he protested, gesturing to my ruined suit and the bright red mark blossoming on my cheek. "I know," I replied softly. "And I need you to do exactly one thing for me. I need you to download the high-definition security footage of this entire lobby from the past 15 minutes. I want the digital file exported to a secure drive and delivered to my office within the hour. Do you understand?" The security chief nodded, immediately recognizing the tone of a woman who was building a bulletproof legal case. "Yes, ma'am, right away." I turned my attention back to Kiara. The guards were dragging her backward toward the revolving glass doors. She was still screaming, her face flushed and her expensive hair tangled and ruined. She looked exactly like the desperate parasitic fraud she truly was. "Tell Darren I will be home by 6, I called out over her, screaming, my voice cutting through the lobby like a siren. "Tell him I have the paperwork ready." Kiara stopped thrashing for a fraction of a second, confusion warring with her rage. Then the guards shoved her through the revolving doors and out into the sweltering Atlanta heat, leaving her on the sidewalk. I stood in the center of the lobby, ignoring the shocked stares of my colleagues. The stinging heat on my cheek and the freezing dampness of the coffee on my chest were physical reminders of the boundary that had just been permanently crossed. Vivian had tried spiritual manipulation. Darren had tried financial extortion. Now Kiara had resorted to physical violence. They had handed me every single weapon I needed to justify their absolute annihilation. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed Jocelyn's number. She answered on the first ring. Maya. Jocelyn said, her voice sharp and alert. Are you okay? Did they try something else? I need you to finalize the federal audit packet, I said, walking slowly toward the private elevator banks. Kiara just assaulted me in the middle of my corporate lobby. It is all on high-definition camera. The physical battery is the final layer of leverage we need for the eviction and the asset freeze. I heard Jocelyn let out a low, lethal breath on the other end of the line. Oh, they are so done, she whispered. They have absolutely no idea what they just unleashed. Do you want me to file the restraining orders now? Not yet, I replied, stepping into the empty elevator and pressing the button for my floor. If we file the restraining orders now, they will scatter. I want them all in one place. I am going home tonight to sign the loan agreement. Maya, what? Jocelyn asked, her tone instantly shifting to panic. You cannot sign that fraudulent loan. You will be legally liable for the $150,000. I am not signing their version of the contract, Jocelyn, I said. A dark, genuine smile finally spreading across my face despite the throbbing pain in my cheek. I am signing the modified authorization document you drafted for me. The one with the hidden federal audit clause buried in the fine print. Darren is so arrogant and so desperate for the cash that he will never read the terms and conditions. I am going to hand him the very document that legally authorizes the FBI and the IRS to seize his accounts. The elevator doors closed, shutting out the noise of the lobby. The endgame had officially begun. I was going to let them plan their lavish parties and celebrate their fake wealth for a few more days. I was going to smile and play the supportive wife while the federal warrants were quietly signed by a judge. The physical assault was the final nail in the coffin. I was no longer just auditing their finances. I was about to audit their entire existence. I drove back to the $2 million brownstone I owned, making sure to park my car slightly off-center in the driveway. A minor detail, but one that projected a distracted, panicked state of mind. Before unlocking the heavy oak front door, I took a moment to inspect my reflection in the rearview mirror. The red mark on my cheek from Kiara slapping me had faded to a dull, bruised purple. I did not apply any concealer to hide it. I wanted Darren to see the physical evidence of his sister losing control. I left the coffee-stained silk blouse exactly as it was, sticky and ruined. I needed to look like a woman who had been utterly defeated by the events of the day. I stepped inside the grand foyer. The house was quiet, save for the muffled sound of a sports game playing on the massive television in the living room. Darren was home. He was sitting on my custom Italian leather sofa, drinking a beer, and pretending he was the master of a castle he was secretly drowning to maintain. I took a deep breath, letting my shoulders slump forward and forcing my breathing to become rapid and shallow. I summoned every memory of every condescending remark, every manipulation, and every financial betrayal I had uncovered over the last 24 hours. I channeled that profound rage and transformed it into water. Tears welled up in my eyes, spilling over my lashes and streaking my carefully applied makeup. I walked into the living room, clutching my ruined briefcase to my chest. Darren looked up from the television. His eyes instantly darted to the massive coffee stain ruining my blouse and the faint bruise swelling on my cheek. He did not rush over to ask if I was okay. He did not show an ounce of concern for his wife. Instead, his jaw tightened and he let out a heavy, exasperated sigh. Kiara called me, he said, his voice dripping with annoyance. She said you tried to have her arrested in the middle of your office building. Are you completely out of your mind, Maya? Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is for my sister to be escorted out by security because my wife does not know how to handle family business privately? He was incredible. His sister had physically assaulted me in my workplace, and Darren was angry that I had embarrassed Kiara. I let out a loud, pathetic sob. I dropped my briefcase onto the floor, letting it fall with a heavy thud, and buried my face in my hands. I wept. I forced my body to shake with heavy, dramatic tremors. Darren. I am so sorry, I cried, my voice muffled behind my hands. I am just so overwhelmed. I do not know what is happening anymore. The church meeting this morning, and Vivian telling me I am failing you, and then Kiara showing up at my firm shouting at me. I was terrified, Darren. I was so scared of losing you and losing this family that I just completely shut down. I froze. I peeked through my fingers to gauge his reaction. Darren's posture instantly shifted. The annoyance on his face melted away, replaced by a sickeningly arrogant satisfaction. This was exactly what he wanted to see. He wanted the independent, successful forensic accountant broken and weeping at his feet. He wanted me to grovel. He walked over and stood in front of me, looking down from his manufactured pedestal of superiority. I told you, Maya, he said, his tone adopting that fake, gentle cadence of a manipulative pastor. You have been walking in pride. You have been trying to lead this household financially, and that is not your place. God placed me here as the head. When you fight my vision, you invite chaos into our lives. Kiara was just passionate about protecting our generational wealth. You provoked her by being stubborn. I nodded frantically, letting more tears fall. You are right, I sobbed, wiping my wet cheeks. You are so right, Darren. I have been selfish. I was just looking at the numbers like a calculator, just like Vivian said. I was not looking at the big picture. I was not trusting my husband. I have been a terrible wife. Darren smiled, a genuine cruel smile of absolute victory. He reached out and patted my shoulder, an empty gesture devoid of any real affection. It takes a big woman to admit when she is wrong, Maya. I am glad you finally woke up and realized what is at stake here. I am building an empire for us. But I need a queen who follows my lead, not one who constantly questions my authority. Are you ready to stop fighting me and start supporting this family? I sniffled and looked up at him with wide, submissive eyes. I am ready, Darren. I am so sorry I doubted you. I have the paperwork ready. I brought it home from the office. I had my legal team look it over just to make sure the bank would not give us any trouble with the funding. I knelt down and unzipped my leather briefcase. I pulled out the crisp stack of documents Jocelyn had meticulously prepared for me. The cover page looked absolutely identical to the original $150,000 personal loan authorization Vivian had demanded I sign. It bore the same headers, the same formatting, and the same fraudulent next-gen crypto holdings entity name. But this document was a lethal weapon. Hidden deep within the 30 pages of dense corporate legal jargon was a uniquely specialized clause. Jocelyn had drafted an irrevocable power of attorney and a full-scale federal financial audit consent form. By signing this specific document, the signatory was legally waiving all rights to financial privacy and voluntarily granting the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Internal Revenue Service, and the Securities and Exchange Commission absolute unfettered access to all personal and business accounts attached to their name. It also explicitly waived the right to dispute any asset forfeiture related to funds acquired through wire fraud. It was a digital death warrant. And because the document was structured as a joint financial disclosure, both the guarantor, me, and the primary beneficiary, Darren, had to sign and initial the final pages. I handed the thick stack of papers to Darren along with a pen. I already signed my portion on page 28. I lied, softly pointing to the bottom of the stack. I just need you to initial the beneficiary disclosures and sign the final page so I can wire the funds to Trey offshore servers first thing tomorrow morning. Darren snatched the documents from my hand. He did not even bother to read the first paragraph. He was so blinded by his own arrogance and so desperate for the $150,000 lifeline to save his collapsing Ponzi scheme that he flipped straight to the back of the packet. He saw my forged signature on the guarantor line and his eyes lit up with unadulterated greed. This is what I am talking about, Maya, Darren said proudly, clicking the pen. This is what submission looks like. When we are sitting on millions next year, you are going to thank me for pushing you out of your comfort zone. He quickly scribbled his initials on the bottom of the disclosure pages, completely ignoring the fine print detailing the federal audit consent. Then he flipped to the final page and signed his full legal name on the dotted line with a dramatic flourish. He handed the packet back to me. Done, he said, clapping his hands together. I am going to call Trey and tell him the capital is secured. You better get that wire transfer processed by 9 in the morning, Maya. Trey has investors breathing down his neck and we cannot look weak. I clutched the poisoned contract to my chest, holding it like a shield. I will take care of everything, Darren, I promised. You will not have to worry about a single thing ever again. Darren walked away, heading toward the kitchen to pour himself a celebratory drink. The second his back was turned, the tears on my face instantly dried. The submissive, trembling posture vanished. I stood up perfectly straight. I looked down at Darren's signature on the final page. He had just voluntarily handed the federal government the keys to his entire fraudulent existence. I walked swiftly up the stairs to my home office, locking the door behind me. I opened my personal safe and pulled out the heavy manila envelopes I had prepared earlier that day. I placed the newly signed poisoned contract into the primary folder. This folder was a masterpiece of forensic accounting. It contained the complete unredacted ledger of Trey Crypto Ponzi scheme. It held the direct routing numbers showing the stolen retirement funds from the elderly members of Zion Fellowship Cathedral being funneled into offshore sports betting accounts. It contained the lease agreement for the matte black Mercedes G-Wagon, proving Darren was using stolen money to finance his mistress' luxury lifestyle. It included the zeroed-out statements from my emergency fund and the exorbitant credit card statements from Kiara. I meticulously organized the evidence, ensuring that any federal agent who opened this package would have a clear, undeniable roadmap to a massive wire fraud and embezzlement conviction. I sealed the heavy manila envelopes and stamped them with the bold red seal of my accounting firm. I checked my watch. It was exactly 4 in the afternoon. I picked up my phone and dialed a specialized high-security courier service that my corporate firm used for sensitive legal documents. Yes, I need an immediate secure pickup at my location, I told the dispatcher, my voice crisp and authoritative. I have 3 packages. One is going to the White-Collar Crime Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Atlanta. The second is going to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. And the third is going directly to the local sheriff department assigned to Fulton County evictions. The dispatcher confirmed the pickup time. I ended the call and walked over to the large bay window of my office, looking down at the street below. Within 20 minutes, an armored courier van pulled up to the curb. I walked down the stairs, slipped out the front door, and handed the heavily sealed packages to the armed guard. I signed the chain of custody form and watched as the van drove away, carrying the complete financial and social destruction of my husband's family. Darren and Vivian wanted to play games with generational wealth. They wanted to use the church and the community to fund their fake black excellence empire. They thought they could step on the quiet girl from the projects and use her credit to hide their crimes. I turned around and looked at the beautiful $2 million brownstone that belonged entirely to my LLC. The federal agents had the evidence. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was put on a beautiful dress and wait for Vivian Lavish's 60th birthday gala to begin. I was going to give them the celebration of a lifetime. I walked back inside the house, listening to Darren laughing loudly on his phone in the kitchen. He was bragging to Trey about how easily he had broken me. He was boasting about his dominance. The sheer delusion was almost poetic. He believed he was the ultimate master manipulator, pulling the strings of everyone around him. But he was nothing more than a puppet dancing on a stage I had carefully constructed. I walked past the kitchen, my heels silent on the hardwood floors, and ascended the stairs one final time for the night. I entered my master closet and bypassed my conservative work suits. I reached into the back and pulled out a custom-tailored emerald green evening gown I had purchased specifically for Vivian's upcoming birthday gala. Vivian had been planning this party for months. She had invited over 100 elite guests, including church elders, local politicians, and wealthy business owners, to celebrate her 60th birthday right here in this very house. She wanted to show off her son's wealth. She wanted to parade her family around like royalty. I ran my hand over the cool silk of the emerald gown. They were going to get exactly what they asked for. They were going to get the spotlight. They were going to get the attention of the entire city of Atlanta. But the audience would not be cheering for their success. The audience would be witnessing their ultimate downfall. I hung the dress on the back of the door and smiled. The evidence was in the mail. The legal traps were locked. The countdown to absolute ruin had officially started. The next morning, I sat in Jocelyn Corner office overlooking the Atlanta skyline. The heavy mahogany desk between us was covered in precisely organized legal documents. I had not slept, but my mind was operating with razor-sharp clarity. Jocelyn slid a thick stack of paper toward me. This was the fault-based divorce petition. I was not filing for a simple, irreconcilable differences separation. I was filing under grounds of adultery and intentional dissipation of marital assets. I attached the lease agreement for Chloe Vance matte black G-Wagon and the bank statements proving Darren drained my emergency fund. I attached the wire transfers proving he was funding Trey and Kiara fraudulent lifestyle. Jocelyn had drafted the petition to ensure that when the dust settled, Darren would not be entitled to a single dime of my actual wealth. I signed the divorce petition with a steady hand. Then Jocelyn slid the second folder across the desk. This was the masterpiece, the immediate notice of eviction. As the sole proprietor and CEO of M Investments, LLC, was legally terminating Darren month-to-month tenancy. But the eviction notice was not just for Darren. I had to add 2 more names to the document: Vivian and Kiara. Just 3 days ago, Kiara had showed up at the brownstone with 6 Louis Vuitton suitcases and a tearful story about her luxury high-rise apartment undergoing emergency plumbing repairs. She claimed she needed to stay in my guest room for a few weeks, but the forensic audit had revealed the truth. Kiara and Trey had been formally evicted from their penthouse because Darren had missed 2 of their rent payments while he was busy prioritizing the down payment for his mistress' vehicle. Trey was currently sleeping on a friend couch while Kiara had leached onto my house. Vivian had also practically moved in, occupying the downstairs suite, because she loved parading her church friends through the mansion, claiming it was her son's property. I signed the eviction notice. I authorized Jocelyn to coordinate directly with the Fulton County Sheriff Department. We scheduled the service of the eviction notice for exactly 8:00 on Saturday evening. Jocelyn looked at me, her eyes gleaming with a fierce protective pride. "The court filings are locked, Maya. The eviction is scheduled. The Federal Courier confirmed delivery to the FBI and the IRS this morning. There is no turning back now." "I do not want to turn back," I replied, picking up my bag. "I want to accelerate." When I returned to the brownstone that afternoon, the sheer arrogance of the people living inside my house was suffocating. I walked into the grand foyer and immediately heard Vivian's loud, booming voice echoing from the formal living room. I walked in to find Vivian, Darren, and Kiara sitting around the custom marble coffee table surrounded by fabric swatches, floral catalogs, and event planning brochures. Vivian looked up at me, her eyes narrowing slightly, but she quickly masked her disdain with a sickeningly sweet smile. "Maya," she chimed, clapping her hands together. "I am so glad you decided to come home early. We have massive news. Since Darren secured the capital for Trey's new venture, we have decided to upgrade my upcoming 60th birthday celebration. We are not just having a dinner anymore. We are hosting an ultra-lavish birthday gala right here at the house this Saturday night." Darren puffed out his chest, looking incredibly smug. He leaned back on my Italian leather sofa, crossing his arms. "It is going to be the event of the season, Maya. We are inviting the entire church leadership, the local city council members, and all of my top-tier investment clients. We are going to show Atlanta what true Black excellence looks like. My mother deserves to be celebrated like a queen, and I am going to make sure everyone sees the empire I have built for this family." I looked at the 3 of them. They were completely and utterly delusional. Darren had signed a federal audit consent form less than 24 hours ago. He was broke. His sister was a squatter who had just been evicted from her own apartment. His brother-in-law was running a Ponzi scheme. And his mother was an extortionist hiding behind a Bible. Yet here they were planning a royal coronation in a house they did not even own. Vivian picked up a glossy brochure for a high-end catering company. "Of course, Maya, since you have finally decided to be a supportive wife, we expect you to handle the logistics. Darren is far too busy managing the portfolio, and Kiara needs to focus on helping Trey with the crypto launch." I want you to hire the caterer's book, the string quartet, and secure the floral arrangements. And do not try to be cheap about it. I want white orchids, imported caviar, and top-shelf champagne. I want this house looking like a palace. Kiara smirked, flipping her hair over her shoulder. Yes, Maya, try to have a little bit of class for once. Do not embarrass us in front of the congregation. A normal person might have snapped. A normal person might have screamed that they were all broke frauds living on borrowed time. But I am an auditor. I know that the higher a stock artificially inflates, the more devastating the inevitable crash will be. I wanted them to inflate this balloon until it was practically blocking out the sun. I gave Vivian a wide, obedient smile. Of course, Vivian, I said, my voice dripping with fake enthusiasm. You deserve the absolute best. I will take care of all the arrangements. I will make sure this is a night that no one in Atlanta will ever forget. For the next 4 days, I played the role of the ultimate subservient wife. I moved through the house with quiet compliance while secretly orchestrating the stage for their public execution. I contacted the most exclusive catering company in Buckhead. I ordered the beluga caviar, the imported truffles, and the vintage champagne Vivian had demanded. I hired a renowned string quartet to play classical music in the foyer. I contracted a luxury event design firm to drape the entire brownstone in cascading white orchids and soft amber uplighting. I did not use Darren money because he did not have any. I did not use the fake loan money because it did not exist. I used the corporate expense account from M Investments LLC. As the property owner, I legally categorized the entire gala as a corporate staging event. I was essentially funding my own victory party. Darren watched me coordinating with the vendors, and his ego swelled to astronomical proportions. He genuinely believed that his alpha male posturing had broken my spirit and forced me into submission. He walked around the house barking orders at the decorators, acting like a billionaire real estate mogul preparing to host the social event of the decade. Maya, make sure the valet attendants park the luxury cars right up front. Darren instructed me on Thursday evening while I was approving the floral arches. I want Pastor Williams and the church elders to see the fleet when they pull up. We need to project massive wealth. I nodded dutifully, jotting down his request on my clipboard. Absolutely, Darren. We will make sure the valet is perfectly positioned. I smiled down at my notes, knowing full well that by the time Pastor Williams arrived, there would likely be federal unmarked vehicles mixed into that luxury fleet. Kiara was equally insufferable. She treated me like her personal assistant, snapping her fingers at me to fetch her sparkling water while she lounged by the pool, scrolling through designer dresses online. She complained constantly about the guest room bed, claiming her back hurt and demanding I upgrade the mattress. I politely apologized for her discomfort, knowing that in exactly 48 hours, she would not have a bed at all. Vivian was in her absolute element. She spent hours on the phone with the other church wives bragging about the gala. She made sure to casually mention how much money her son was spending on her. She bragged about the caviar and the orchids. She invited people who were not even on the original guest list just to maximize her audience. She wanted the entire city to witness her coronation as the supreme matriarch of a wealthy, powerful family. I watched them spin their web of lies tighter and tighter. Every vendor I paid, every flower I arranged, every bottle of champagne I chilled was another brick in the tomb they were building for themselves. By Friday night, the brownstone had been completely transformed. The house looked like a spread out of Architectural Digest. The grand staircase was wrapped in white silk and orchids. The backyard patio was set up with glowing cocktail tables and a massive outdoor projection screen Vivian had requested for a slideshow of her life. Darren stood in the living room holding a glass of whiskey, admiring the setup. You actually did a decent job, Maya, he said, not looking at me. See what happens when you stop fighting me and just follow instructions. We are going to be unstoppable after tomorrow night. Trey investors are going to see this house, and they are going to throw millions at us. I stood a few feet away from him, my face perfectly serene. You are absolutely right, Darren, I replied smoothly. Tomorrow night is going to change everything. This family is going to get exactly what it deserves. He smirked, raising his glass to me before walking upstairs to the master bedroom, locking the door behind him. He was still keeping me in the guest room as punishment. It was a punishment I gladly accepted. I walked into the guest room and locked the door. I pulled out my secure phone and sent a single text message to Jocelyn. "The stage is set. Are the guests of honor confirmed?" Jocelyn replied less than a minute later. "Warrant signed. Sheriff mobilized. 8 p.m. sharp. Dressed to kill Maya." I set the phone down on the nightstand and walked over to the closet. I unzipped the protective garment bag hanging inside. The emerald green, custom-tailored evening gown shimmered in the dim light. I ran my fingers over the luxurious silk. I had survived 5 years of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and degrading insults. I had survived being slapped in my own office. I had survived being called a parasite in a house I owned. Tomorrow night, I was not going to be a supportive wife. I was not going to be a quiet accountant. I was going to be the absolute architect of their destruction. I turned off the light and went to sleep, my mind completely at peace. The morning of the gala arrived with a thick, humid heat that settled over Atlanta like a heavy blanket. I woke up at 5 in the morning before the sun even had a chance to crest over the city skyline. The house was dead quiet. Darren and Kiara were still fast asleep, dreaming of their impending billionaire status. Vivian was snoring in the downstairs suite, resting up for her grand coronation. I moved silently through the guest room, stripping the bed and packing a sleek leather duffel bag. Today was the day of the gala, but my first priority was asset protection. As a forensic accountant, I know that when a financial raid happens, the collateral damage can be unpredictable. Federal agents do not sort through sentimental value when they seize property, and angry broke people tend to destroy things they cannot possess. I was not going to leave a single piece of my actual generational wealth inside this house for them to ruin, or for the FBI to accidentally tag in their sweep of Darren fraudulent enterprise. I slipped out of the guest room and crept down the hallway to the hidden wall safe behind the library bookshelves. I punched in the biometric code. The heavy steel door clicked open. Inside were the things that truly mattered. I pulled out the vintage gold pocket watch that belonged to my grandfather. He wore it every day when he worked at the rail yard. I grabbed the velvet box containing my mother diamond wedding band and the original deed to the apartment complex my father built from the ground up. I also pulled out the sealed corporate binders containing the absolute proof of ownership for M Investments, LLC, and the title to the brownstone. These were not rented luxury cars or fake crypto portfolios. These items represented real tangible black wealth built through decades of calloused hands and quiet sacrifice. I placed them carefully into my bag along with my Howard University diploma and my certified public accountant licensing certificates. I was not leaving a single ounce of my identity in a house that was about to become a federal crime scene. I walked downstairs past the sprawling floral arrangements and the catering prep tables that were already being set up. I loaded the duffel bag into the trunk of my car under the guise of running early morning errands for Vivian Party. I drove straight to a highly secure climate-controlled storage facility in downtown Atlanta, where I had rented a private vault under a blind trust. I locked my family legacy inside the steel box. When I walked back out to my car, I felt a profound physical weight lift off my shoulders. The perimeter was secured. My history was safe. Now I could fully focus on the execution of the present. I pulled my car into a secluded corner of a coffee shop parking lot and dialed Jocelyn on my secure phone line. She answered immediately, the background noise of her busy law firm humming behind her voice. "The assets are secured," I told her, taking a sip of my black coffee. "We are completely cleared on my end. What is the status of the cavalry?" Jocelyn let out a sharp, triumphant exhale. "The federal judge signed the warrants at 6 this morning, Maya. The FBI White-Collar Crime Division and the IRS Criminal Investigation agents have fully mobilized. They reviewed the encrypted ledger you sent. They mapped the routing numbers straight from the church retirement accounts into the offshore betting syndicate. Trey and Darren are not just looking at wire fraud anymore. They are looking at aggravated embezzlement and tax evasion." A cold shiver of absolute vindication ran down my spine, and the timing I asked. Coordinated to the minute, Jocelyn confirmed, her voice crackling with pure predatory excitement. "The federal agents are staging their unmarked vehicles a block away from the brownstone at 7:30 tonight. They are letting the guests arrive. They want Darren and Trey completely relaxed and surrounded by witnesses so they cannot attempt to destroy any digital devices when the breach happens. And what about our local friends? I asked, checking my watch. The Fulton County Sheriff Department is locked and loaded, Jocelyn said. They processed the immediate notice of eviction based on the breach of contract. Since Darren signed the federal audit consent form, he technically violated the morality and criminality clauses of his month-to-month lease agreement with M Investments LLC. The eviction is ironclad. 2 sheriff deputies are scheduled to knock on your front door at exactly 8 o'clock tonight. It was a logistical masterpiece. The federal government was going to seize their freedom, and the local government was going to seize their shelter, all within the exact same hour. Trey is already panicking, Jocelyn added, lowering her voice. My private investigator flagged some chatter on his phone lines this morning. The early crypto investors are demanding their 30% returns for the month. Trey has zero liquidity. He is counting completely on Darren handing him that $150,000 wire transfer by Monday morning. They are literally banking their entire freedom on your submission, Maya. Let them dream for a few more hours, I said, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I will see you at 8, Jocelyn. I returned to the brownstone just as the chaos of the event preparations reached a fever pitch. Vivian was marching around the grand foyer, shouting at the florist to add more orchids to the staircase. Kiara was screaming at a caterer about the placement of the caviar stations. Darren was pacing the living room, talking loudly on his phone using aggressive Wall Street buzzwords to impress anyone within earshot. I slipped past them and retreated to the guest room. The sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the Atlanta skyline. I locked the door and walked over to the garment bag hanging on the closet door. It was time. I unzipped the bag and pulled out the custom-tailored emerald green gown. I slipped the heavy, luxurious silk over my shoulders. The fabric draped perfectly against my skin, hugging my curves with architectural precision. The deep green color was rich and regal, a stark contrast to the flashy, gaudy outfits Kiara and Vivian favored. I sat at the vanity and applied my makeup with a steady hand. I highlighted my cheekbones and applied a bold crimson lipstick. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, elegant chignon that emphasized the sharp angles of my face. I looked in the mirror. I did not look like the subservient, quiet accountant they had abused for 5 years. I did not look like the victim of a hostile mother-in-law or a cheating husband. I looked like the CEO of a multi-million-dollar holding company. I looked like a queen, preparing to reclaim her throne. I slipped on a pair of black stiletto heels and unlocked the guest room door. The sound of the string quartet warming up drifted up the grand staircase. The low hum of wealthy guests arriving filled the foyer. I walked to the top of the stairs and began my descent. My heels clicked softly against the hardwood steps. Darren was standing at the bottom of the staircase wearing a rented velvet tuxedo that was slightly too tight across his shoulders. He was holding a glass of scotch, preparing to greet the church elders and the local politicians. He looked up and saw me walking down the stairs. For a fraction of a second, his mask slipped. His eyes widened and his jaw went slack. He saw the sheer, undeniable power radiating from my posture. He saw a woman who completely eclipsed his entire manufactured existence. But his fragile ego could not handle the threat. His shock instantly morphed into defensive arrogance. He stepped forward to block my path at the bottom of the stairs. He looked me up and down, his lip curling into a cruel sneer. "What are you wearing, Maya?" he muttered, his voice low and dripping with condescension. "You look like you are trying too hard. Do not forget why we are here tonight. This party is to celebrate my mother and my success. I need you to stay in the background. Do not try to network with my investors and do not embarrass us by talking about your boring little accounting job. Just smile and stay out of the way." I stopped on the final step, putting us exactly at eye level. I looked at the rented tuxedo. I thought about the stolen emergency fund, the G-Wagon, the fake crypto portfolio, and the federal agents currently staging their vehicles 1 block away. I did not argue. I did not defend my dress or my career. I simply smiled. It was a serene, terrifyingly calm smile. "Do not worry, Darren," I said, my voice soft and sweet like spun sugar. "I am going to stay exactly where I belong. And I promise you I'm going to give your investors a presentation they will never, ever forget." I brushed past him and walked into the grand foyer. The brownstone had been utterly transformed into a staging ground for the greatest illusion Atlanta had ever seen. The air was thick with the scent of white orchids and expensive catering. A string quartet played a classical rendition of a popular rhythm and blues song in the corner, setting a perfectly curated mood of affluent sophistication. Over 100 guests filled the main level of the house, spilling out onto the illuminated back patio. Vivian had spared no expense with my corporate funds to ensure her guest list was a who is who of the local elite. I saw Pastor Williams and several prominent deacons from Zion Fellowship Cathedral holding crystal champagne flutes. I recognized two local city council members laughing near the caviar station. There were wealthy business owners, socialites, and influential community leaders, all dressed in their finest evening wear. And right in the center of the room, holding court like a reigning monarch, was Vivian. She was wearing a silver sequined gown that caught the amber uplighting with every movement. Around her neck and wrists hung massive glittering stones. From a distance, they looked like breathtaking diamonds. But with my trained eye, I knew they were high-quality cubic zirconia, fake stones for a fake queen. She was laughing loudly, accepting compliments on the house and making sure everyone knew her son was the mastermind behind this incredible display of wealth. "Oh yes, Darren insisted on hosting my 60th here," Vivian boasted to a group of wealthy church elders. "I told him he worked too hard, but you know how my son is. He just had to buy this gorgeous brownstone to make sure his mother was properly celebrated. He is such a blessing. A true example of Black excellence." I walked past the group, keeping my expression perfectly pleasant. I glided through the crowd, nodding politely at the guests who assumed I was just the quiet, supportive wife. I spotted Kiara near the patio doors wearing a designer dress she had undoubtedly purchased on a credit card her brother was secretly paying off. She was clinging to Trey, who was currently cornering a retired school principal and aggressively pitching his cryptocurrency terminology. Trey was wearing a flashy velvet jacket and a heavy gold chain, holding a glass of expensive bourbon. He was using words like decentralized finance and blockchain liquidity with the smooth, practiced rhythm of a seasoned con artist. The retired principal looked confused but intrigued, eager to secure a financial future for his grandchildren. It made my stomach churn to watch them actively hunt for fresh victims in my own home. I continued my perimeter walk, and my eyes locked onto a familiar face near the grand fireplace. Chloe Vance. The choir director was wearing a sleek crimson dress and holding a martini. She was chatting with a group of younger church members, but her eyes kept darting toward Darren. She looked incredibly smug, basking in the glow of the luxury lifestyle she thought Darren was providing her. She had absolutely no idea that the federal government already had the lease agreement for her Mercedes G-Wagon in an evidence locker. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7:30. We were 30 minutes away from ground zero. Suddenly, the string quartet stopped playing. The low hum of conversation gradually quieted down as Darren stepped in front of the massive stone fireplace. He tapped a silver spoon against his crystal glass, drawing the attention of the entire room. He adjusted the lapels of his rented tuxedo and flashed his signature charismatic smile. "If I could have everyone attention, please," Darren announced, his voice projecting smoothly across the grand living room. "Thank you all for being here tonight. It is an absolute honor to host so many esteemed friends, colleagues, and spiritual leaders in my home." He paused, letting the words "my home" echo through the silent room. I stood near the back by the heavy oak doors, watching the performance. "We are gathered here tonight to celebrate an extraordinary woman." Darren continued, gesturing toward Vivian, who stepped forward, wiping a fake tear from her eye. "My mother. Vivian has been the bedrock of our family. She taught me the value of hard work, of faith, and of building a legacy. Everything I have achieved, the investment firm, the real estate portfolio, this beautiful brownstone we are standing in right now. It is all because of the foundation she laid for me." The crowd erupted into warm applause. Pastor Williams nodded approvingly. Vivian placed a hand over her heart, soaking up the adoration like a sponge. But Darren was not finished. He held up his hand to quiet the room. His ego was too massive to just let the moment be about his mother. He had a captive audience of wealthy individuals, and he was desperate for their capital. As a black man in America, building generational wealth is not just a goal, it is a responsibility. Darren preached seamlessly, transitioning from a loving son into a predatory salesman. We have to create our own tables. We have to fund our own empires. And that is exactly what my family is doing. I have spent my career navigating traditional finance, but the future is decentralized. The future is digital. He gestured toward the patio doors. Trey puffed out his chest and walked over to stand beside Darren. I want to introduce you all to my brother-in-law, Trey, Darren announced, placing a hand on Trey's shoulder. Trey is the brilliant mind behind Next-Gen Crypto Holdings. He is building a revolutionary platform that is going to disrupt the entire financial sector. We have already secured massive initial funding, and the early returns are staggering. We are talking about 30% monthly yields. A collective murmur of shock and interest rippled through the crowd of church elders and business leaders. 30% was an impossible return for any legitimate investment, but to people who trusted Darren, it sounded like a miracle. I am officially backing Next-Gen Crypto Holdings as the primary venture capitalist. Darren lied smoothly, without a single ounce of hesitation. And because we believe in uplifting our community, we are opening up a highly exclusive secondary funding round tonight. For the people in this room, my friends and my spiritual family, we want to give you the opportunity to get in on the ground floor of this empire. If you are interested in securing your family financial future, Trey and I will be taking private meetings in the study right after this toast. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. He used the credibility of the church, the emotional weight of his mother's birthday, and the physical illusion of the $2 million brownstone to legitimize a blatant Ponzi scheme. He was actively trying to rob these people blind while drinking my champagne. Do not miss out on the opportunity to build your legacy, Darren concluded, raising his glass high into the air. To my beautiful mother Vivian, to family, and to Black excellence. To Vivian, the crowd echoed, raising their glasses in unison. The room buzzed with immediate excitement. Several older deacons were already leaning toward Trey, eager to hand over their retirement savings to be part of the exclusive opportunity. Darren looked incredibly proud of himself. He scanned the room, his eyes locking onto mine at the back of the crowd. He offered me a sharp, arrogant wink. He truly believed he had won. He believed I had signed the loan and that his fraudulent empire was secure. I looked at my watch. It was exactly 7:45. The federal agents were in position outside. Jocelyn was waiting in the wings. It was time to pull the pin on the grenade. Before the string quartet could resume playing, and before anyone could make their way to the study to hand Trey a single dollar, I stepped forward. I picked up a delicate crystal champagne flute from a passing waiter tray. I grabbed a silver spoon. Clink, clink, clink. The sharp, piercing sound of the silver striking the crystal cut through the low hum of conversation. Heads turned in my direction. The chatter died down instantly. I did not rush. I walked slowly and deliberately through the sea of wealthy guests, my emerald green gown flowing behind me like liquid glass. The crowd naturally parted to let me through. I stepped right up to the grand fireplace, standing directly next to Darren and Vivian. Darren's smile faltered slightly, a brief flash of irritation crossing his features. He leaned in close to me. "What are you doing?" he hissed under his breath. His teeth clenched together. "I told you to stay in the background." I ignored him completely. I turned to face the 100 guests gathered in my living room. I offered them a radiant, welcoming smile. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice carrying a smooth, confident authority that immediately commanded the room. "I am Maya Darren, wife. I know my husband just gave a beautiful and inspiring toast about generational wealth and building empires, and he is absolutely right. Transparency and financial literacy are the true cornerstones of any successful legacy." Vivian shifted uncomfortably, her fake diamond necklace glittering under the chandelier. She shot a nervous warning glance at Kiara, who was standing near the front of the crowd. They did not know what I was doing, but they knew I was not sticking to their script, because family and truth are so incredibly important to us. I continued my gaze sweeping across the faces of Pastor Williams, the church elders, and the local politicians. I have prepared a very special presentation to honor my mother-in-law on her 60th birthday. I also want to take this unique opportunity to properly showcase the brilliant financial mechanics behind my husband's success and my brother-in-law, highly exclusive new venture Next Gen Crypto Holdings. Darren relaxed slightly. He thought I was finally playing the role of the supportive, submissive wife. He thought I was stepping up to publicly validate his lies and help him close the deal with the investors. He actually smiled and gestured for me to continue stepping back to give me the floor. I pulled a sleek silver remote control from the pocket hidden in the seam of my gown. I pointed it toward the ceiling. The massive motorized projection screen that Vivian had requested for her birthday slideshow slowly descended over the grand window behind me. The lights in the living room automatically dimmed, creating the perfect cinematic atmosphere. You see, as a forensic accountant for federal corporate entities, I have a very unique way of expressing my love and appreciation, I announced, my voice echoing clearly in the darkened room. While some people write speeches, I prefer to let the raw, undeniable numbers tell the real story. I believe the congregation and the potential investors in this room deserve to see exactly where their hard-earned money is going. I pressed the button on the remote. The high-definition projector clicked on, throwing a massive, blindingly bright image onto the screen behind me. But it was not a slideshow of Vivian childhood. It was not a montage of happy family vacations or romantic wedding photos. The image, projected at 10 feet tall for every single elite guest in the room to see, was a highly detailed, meticulously highlighted bank statement. And the name printed at the very top of the statement was Darren. I turned to look at my husband. The smug, arrogant expression had completely vanished from his face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. The countdown had reached 0. The facade was officially over. Let us take a deep dive into the portfolio, I said, holding the microphone steady. I promise you, this is an investment strategy you will never, ever forget. Section 12, the forensic toast, word count, 1,500 words. I pointed my silver laser clicker at the 10-foot screen, lowering the microphone just enough to let my voice resonate with perfect clarity. The stark black and white ledger of Darren's primary checking account hovered above us, impossible to ignore. I cleared my throat, letting the sound carry over the stunned silence of the grand living room. Darren talks a lot about building an empire. I began, my tone perfectly conversational and smooth. He preaches about legacy and uplifting the community. But empires require liquid capital, and as you can see right here, my husband's capital is incredibly tied up. Let us direct our attention to the highlighted line item from exactly 4 months ago. A direct wire transfer of $35,000 to an entity called Peach State Premium Leasing. A collective murmur rippled through the elegantly dressed crowd. Darren took a step toward me, his face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. Maya, shut that off right now, he demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh, guttural threat that only the people closest to us could hear. Turn it off, or I swear to God I will make you regret it. I am just celebrating your immense generosity, Darren, I replied, stepping gracefully out of his reach. I clicked the remote again. The projection zoomed in on the certified lease agreement document. Because that $35,000 was the down payment for a brand new matte black Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon. And the monthly recurring auto draft currently eating away at our finances is $2,850. But the absolute most interesting part of this luxury investment is the secondary authorized driver. I clicked the remote one more time. The vehicle insurance policy flashed onto the massive screen. The name Chloe Vance was highlighted in bright neon yellow. The gasp from the congregation was deafening. Every single head in the room instantly snapped toward the grand fireplace where Chloe Vance was standing. The choir director dropped her martini glass. It shattered against the polished hardwood floor, the sound sharp and violent in the tense air. She covered her mouth with her hands, her face turning a sickly shade of gray. The elite church wives who had ambushed me that very morning stared at her in absolute horror. That is right, I announced, my voice echoing powerfully through the space. My husband completely drained our joint emergency savings to play sugar daddy, to the lead choir director of Zion Fellowship Cathedral. Vivian. I know you absolutely love her soprano voice on Sunday mornings, but I hope you realize my corporate paycheck has been actively funding her daily commute to choir rehearsal. Vivian let out a strangled, high-pitched shriek, clutching her fake diamond necklace as if she were having heart palpitations. Lies, she screamed, pointing a shaking, trembling finger at me. These are fabricated lies. She is a jealous, unstable woman trying to destroy my son. Do not look at that screen. Numbers do not lie, Vivian. I corrected her, my voice slicing through her manufactured hysteria like a blade. But your son absolutely does, and so does your son-in-law. I pressed the button on the remote again. The projection shifted seamlessly to the offshore routing paths of next-gen crypto holdings. The sleek, futuristic logo Trey had paid a graphic designer to create sat mockingly at the top of the detailed ledger. Trey froze completely. The glass of expensive bourbon slipped from his hand and landed with a dull thud on the plush rug. Kiara let out a high-pitched wail of panic, realizing the exact nature of the documents currently displayed for the entire room to see. She instinctively grabbed Trey's arm, digging her acrylic nails into his velvet jacket. Trey pitched you all a decentralized finance platform, I told the crowd, walking slowly across the room to ensure every single person could hear me clearly. He promised you 30% returns on your investments. He used words like blockchain and liquidity to sound smart. But Next-Gen Crypto Holdings is not a tech startup. It is a fraudulent shell company registered to a strip mall mailbox in Delaware. And the money you gave him did not go into secure servers. I pointed the laser at the screen, tracking the bright red arrows connecting the congregants' deposits to the outgoing withdrawals. Deacon Hayes. I see your $20,000 deposit from last month. Mother Wilkins. I see the $50,000 you pulled directly from your hard-earned teacher retirement fund. Let me show you exactly where your generational wealth is currently sitting. The screen flashed to the offshore banking records. The room went completely still as the horrific reality began to sink in. Trey transferred your retirement savings directly into a high-risk offshore sports betting syndicate. I revealed, my voice completely devoid of mercy. Your life savings paid for his degenerate gambling addiction. And whatever was left over paid for Kiara designer handbags and the minimum monthly payments on their maxed-out credit cards. They do not own anything. They are buried in consumer debt, and you have been keeping them afloat. Deacon Hayes, an elderly man who had known Darren since he was a child in Sunday school, stepped forward, his hands shaking violently. Darren the deacon rasped his voice, breaking with deep, profound betrayal. Tell me this is not true. Tell me you did not look me in the eye and take my pension. Tell me you did not rob your own people. Darren backed away from the deacon, his eyes darting frantically around the room looking for an exit. He was sweating profusely, ruining his rented tuxedo. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The charismatic golden boy of the church, the beacon of black excellence, had been completely stripped of his armor. He was exposed as a predator bleeding his own vulnerable community dry. It gets worse. I continued, refusing to give them a single second to breathe or formulate a lie. I clicked to the final slide. It was Darren's personal asset ledger showing the catastrophic margin debt and his zeroed-out checking balances. Darren is absolutely broke. He is drowning in high-interest predatory debt. He invited you all here tonight to squeeze you for more cash because his creditors are closing in. He tried to force me into taking out a $150,000 personal loan yesterday just to keep this pathetic Ponzi scheme from collapsing before the weekend. He needed my pristine credit to save his sinking ship. The entire gala erupted into absolute chaos. The polite, affluent sophistication of the evening shattered into a million pieces. Over 100 guests began shouting all at once. Women were screaming in disbelief. Men were pushing forward, demanding their money back from Trey. Pastor Williams stood frozen in shock, staring at Vivian with an expression of pure, utter disgust. The carefully constructed facade had been ripped down to reveal a den of absolute thieves. "Cut the power!" Vivian shrieked at the top of her lungs. her face contorted into a mask of pure feral desperation. "Somebody cut the power right now. Unplug that machine. Turn off that screen." She scrambled towards the projection unit, knocking over a tray of imported caviar and champagne flutes in the process. Kiara was sobbing hysterically, pulling at Trey's jacket, demanding he do something to fix it. Trey was furiously tapping on his phone, likely trying to access his offshore accounts, and failing, because the federal asset freeze had already been initiated by my signature earlier that day. Darren finally snapped. The sheer public humiliation, the absolute destruction of his massive ego, and the realization that his entire fraudulent life was over pushed him into a blind animalistic rage. "You stupid, arrogant parasite!" Darren roared, his face twisted into a vicious, ugly snarl. He lunged forward, shoving past Deacon Hayes and barreling directly toward me. His hands were curled into tight fists, and his eyes were wide with violent intent. He intended to physically hurt me right there in front of the entire congregation, to silence me by any means necessary. I did not flinch. I stood my ground, holding my head high, my emerald silk gown pooling beautifully around my feet. I knew exactly who had my back. Before Darren could even cross the distance, Jocelyn stepped smoothly out from the panicked crowd. She moved with lethal precision, stepping directly into his path and throwing up a perfectly manicured hand, placing herself as an impenetrable shield between me and my husband. "I highly suggest you halt your momentum." Darren Jocelyn commanded, her voice carrying the absolute terrifying authority of a woman who destroyed arrogant men for a living. "Because touching her will elevate your incoming charges from federal wire fraud to felony assault. And trust me, you cannot afford the bail money. You do not even own the tuxedo you are wearing." Darren stopped dead in his tracks, breathing heavily like a cornered wild animal. He looked at Jocelyn and then looked back at me, the reality of his profound powerlessness finally taking hold. He was completely trapped in a cage of his own making. The panic among the guests reached an absolute crescendo. The elite congregation members who had spent the last hour marveling at the opulence of the event were now scrambling away from Vivian and her family as if they were contagious. The atmosphere of affluent grace dissolved entirely, replaced by the raw, primal energy of people realizing they had been utterly betrayed by someone they trusted. Then the atmosphere in the grand living room shifted dramatically. The ambient amber uplighting, casting warm, elegant shadows against the walls, was suddenly overpowered. Flashing red and blue lights cut through the darkness outside. The brilliant, frantic strobes illuminated the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the brownstone, throwing harsh, moving colors across the faces of the terrified guests. The blinding police lights painted the entire room in a chaotic strobe effect. The sound of heavy tires screeching to a halt on the pavement echoed outside, followed by the loud, distinct slamming of multiple car doors. Heavy, rapid footsteps marched purposefully up the stone steps of the front porch. I watched Darren's chest heave as he stared at the flashing red and blue reflections dancing across the expensive marble floors of the foyer. The undeniable presence of law enforcement descending upon the property shattered whatever remaining delusions he harbored. The intoxicating dream of being a millionaire investment mogul evaporated, leaving behind the pathetic reality of a terrified man about to lose everything he valued. I kept my posture perfectly rigid, absorbing the chaotic symphony of sirens wailing in the distance, steadily growing louder as more units responded to the scene. The majestic brownstone, which had served as the ultimate symbol of Darren's fraudulent success, was about to become the site of his absolute ruin. He looked at me one final time, a mixture of profound hatred and paralyzing fear swirling in his eyes, but I offered him no comfort and no mercy. The cavalry had arrived right on schedule, and the reckoning was finally here. The heavy oak front doors of the brownstone were physically forced apart by federal agents wearing tactical jackets. The letters FBI and IRS were emblazoned across their chests. Uniformed officers from the sheriff department stood right behind them. The visual impact of the task force flooding the grand foyer was absolute and staggering. The remaining church elders and local politicians scattered like frightened prey, backing against the floral arches. A senior FBI agent stepped forward holding a thick stack of warrants. He did not ask for permission to speak. He commanded the space with the rigid authority of the federal government. Darren Vance and Trey Miller, the agent announced, his voice booming over the terrified whispers. We have federal warrants for your immediate arrest on multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. Put your hands behind your backs and step forward immediately. Trey's legs gave out. He collapsed onto his knees, weeping openly. Kiara shrieked, throwing herself over him, but two deputies easily moved her aside. The illusion of the tough crypto mogul evaporated instantly. Darren tried to run. The charismatic investment director turned his back on his family and sprinted toward the patio doors. He did not make it 3 steps. Two federal agents tackled him to the hardwood floor. The sound of metal handcuffs ratcheting tightly around his wrists echoed through the silent room. They hauled Darren to his feet. His rented velvet tuxedo was torn and covered in dust. He stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, begging me silently to save him. I simply took another sip of my champagne and looked away. While the agents were reading Darren and Trey their rights, a Fulton County Sheriff deputy stepped forward holding a bright yellow document. He scanned the terrified crowd until his eyes locked onto Vivian and Kiara. Vivian Vance and Kiara Miller, the deputy said loudly, walking directly toward them. I am serving you with an immediate notice of eviction. You are trespassing on private corporate property. You have exactly 30 minutes to gather your personal belongings and vacate the premises. If you are not off this property by the end of that time frame, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing. Vivian's face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. She looked at the deputy as if he were speaking a foreign language. Her fake diamond necklace heaved up and down as she struggled to breathe. You cannot kick us out of my son house! Vivian screamed, her voice cracking with absolute desperation. She pointed a shaking finger at the ceiling. My son bought this beautiful brownstone for us. We are the Vance family. We have rights. You are making a mistake. This is a $2 million mansion and we belong here. I stepped forward, my emerald green silk gown gliding effortlessly across the floor. I stopped right in front of Vivian, looking down at her terrified, pathetic face. I took one final slow sip of my vintage champagne. Your son does not own this house, Vivian, I said, my voice smooth, cold, and caring to every single person left in the room. My LLC does. I bought this house with my own money years ago. Darren is nothing but a month-to-month tenant who just breached his contract by committing federal wire fraud. And you have exactly 30 minutes to pack your fake bags and get off my property. The absolute devastation that washed over Vivian's face was beautiful. She stumbled backward, clutching her chest, and collapsed into a velvet chair. Kiara burst into loud, dramatic sobs, realizing she was completely homeless and her husband was going to federal prison. The elite church congregation watched in horror as their former matriarch was reduced to a trespassing squatter. The deputies instructed Vivian and Kiara to move upstairs immediately and begin packing. The remaining guests quickly filed out the front door, avoiding eye contact with me out of sheer respect and fear. Pastor Williams offered a silent nod of apology before disappearing into the Atlanta night. They knew better than to cross the woman who had just orchestrated the greatest financial takedown in the history of their congregation. Within 25 minutes, Kiara and Vivian dragged their cheap suitcases down the staircase. Their makeup was smeared and their designer clothes looked ridiculous against the backdrop of their absolute ruin. The deputies escorted them out the front door and down the stone steps. Vivian looked back at the house one last time, her eyes filled with the bitter realization that she had lost absolutely everything because of her own greed and arrogance. I closed the heavy oak door right in her face and locked the deadbolt with a resounding click. I walked up the sweeping staircase and stepped out onto the private master balcony overlooking the city skyline. Jocelyn joined me a few minutes later holding 2 fresh glasses of champagne. She handed one to me and we clinked our glasses in the warm southern night air. I stood there looking out at the city, reflecting on the profound power of financial independence. For generations, Black women have been force-fed the toxic myth of the strong Black woman. We are told to suffer in silence, to carry the burdens of broken men, to sacrifice our peace and our wealth, to build up kings who do not respect us. But tonight, I shattered that myth entirely. I refuse to be a stepping stone for a fake empire. I protected my peace, my money, and my future. I took back my power, and I let the parasites reap the exact destruction they had sown. I took a deep breath of the fresh night air, feeling lighter than I had in 5 long years. The storm was finally over, and the sweet, absolute peace of taking out the trash was the greatest victory of all. I looked over at Jocelyn and we both smiled. The bright future belonged to me now.